Ladies and gentlemen, friends, welcome to the Bounce Back Podcast special edition today on Monday. And we interrupt our normal schedule to bring you this special edition because of a world event that is etched in history: the United States, Iran, and Israel war. We would like to add our voice today in this podcast because we feel that this is a very, very important time in history, and also that for geopolitics and global politics that it is very, very important to determine where the world is going and who are the key players. Indeed, it is a special edition because we find ourselves realizing and wanting and knowing, wanting to understand why there is an escalation of conflict in the Middle East today. That is why we brought you this special edition, and we've suspended any other program that will be coming this week till we deduce and find out what this program is all about. Like others who have been talking about Iran and the United States and the escalation of conflict, we would like to take it differently and give you, the viewer, a different tangent. Today, we would like to discuss about the US-Iran conflict in a history of 70 years. We want to go back to history and look at where this conflict, this problem began, who were the players then, so that we can understand who are the players today. The title of this podcast for today is US-Iran, 70 Years of Strategic Collision. Welcome and take this ride with me. I'm your host, Robert Onyari, and this is the Bounce Back Podcast by Robert. So we are going to determine the story of Iran and the US in 21 key moments of history that defined the relationship between the US, Iran, and Israel. We will go back to 1953, which marks the beginning of these issues between the Iranians, and the Americans. In 1953, a key event happened. It is worth noticing that this was the last time that Iran had a democratically elected government led by a prime minister. And this was Mohammad Mossadegh. In 1953, the United States, through the CIA, engineered a coup that dethroned Mohammad Mossadegh. Why? Prime Minister Mossadegh had been elected to a majority government in that year, and he nationalized Iran's oil. Remember, Iran is the 7th largest producer of global oil, and the oil interests have always been at the center of Iranian geopolitical conflict. So when Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil, the US and UK orchestrated an operation called Operation Ajax to remove him, and they restored the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran is as we all know, or rather we would know, Iran is historically Persia, and Persia was led by kingdoms, and the Iranian Shah, Pahlavi Shah, was the last Shah of Iran, was the last Persian king. So the the United Kingdom, with the help of the United States, restored the Shah of Iran in 1953 after dethroning Mohammad Mossadegh. There was relative peace during that period, and in fact, in 1955, the US, the UK, and Iran signed the Treaty of Amity. This treaty was signed to promote trade and peaceful relations. The treaty largely became symbolic after 1979, but we are going to get to 1979 and determine what happened. Going to 1979, there was an Islamic revolution. This was an event that struck at the heart of Iran and caused global shock. The Shah was overthrown, and a Muslim cleric called Ayatollah Khomeini established the Islamic Republic of Iran. But before the Islamic Revolution, between the period of the capitulation of Mohammad Mossadegh and the Islamic Revolution, the Shah of Iran enjoyed relative peace. He was a darling of the West. He enjoyed protection from the US and the UK, and at that time there was relative peace and modernization in Iran. In fact, at that moment, or at that time, Iran was one of the most westernized nations in the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1979, or rather during the years of the reign of Pahlavi Shah, the Shah of Iran, there was a very, very popular Islamic cleric in Iran who was called Ayatollah Khomeini. Ayatollah Khomeini, among other Islamists, were exiled when the Shah was king of Iran, and this specific cleric took refuge in France. Therefore, during the Islamic Revolution of Iran, on February 11, 1979, the Shah of Iran was deposed and the Islamic cleric came from exile, Ayatollah Khomeini, to take back the reins of power. Ironically, he was even brought by an Air France aircraft on that day, on February 11, 1979, and institutionalized Iran and changed it to become a total Islamic state. By total Islamic state, it means that they suspended the civilian constitution and imposed on Iran what was therefore called Islamic Sharia law. Going on forward, on November 4th, 1979, there was a hostage takeover. Students overran the US Embassy and they took over the US Embassy and took hostage 52 American civilians who were working at the American Embassy in Tehran. That began a standoff that lasted for 444 days. It was during the president of Jimmy Carter in 1979 that this happened. The hostages were taken, and one of the reasons that Jimmy Carter never got a second term in office is because of this hostage situation. For 444 days, the hostages remained locked up in Tehran, and they were only released on January 20th, 1980. Again, ironically, during the swearing in on January 20th of the next president, President Ronald Reagan, then the hostages were released and they went back to the United States. This indeed began what we call today the hostility between the US and Iran. Therefore, after the United States Islamic Revolution, the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979, things became frosty between Iran and the United States. This US Embassy hostage crisis had humiliated the United States and entrenched hostility that has gone on up until today. It was the first major test of Iranian-American relations after the revolution. Now we go to the 1980s. In the 1980 to 1988, Iran went to war with Iraq. Remember, the president of Iraq at that time, when the Islamic cleric was head of Iran, was Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein attacked Iran, and they did a conflict for 8 years between 1980 and 1988. And because the United States was in diplomatic conflict with Iran, it decided by proxy to support Iraq. Also, it was during the Cold War and powers chose sides. Iraq was supported by the United States. They supported Saddam Hussein to counter Iran. During this war, nearly 1 million people died, and this was a result of proxy involvement that had devastating consequences and reshaped Gulf politics. Indeed, US backing of Iraq was one of the reasons that continued to entrench further hate between Iran and the United States. And that is why during this period, a paramilitary Islamic organization was born, supported by Iran, and this is Hezbollah. Hezbollah had been started after this, the Islamic revolution had happened in Iran, and Hezbollah had its roots in Lebanon, Beirut in Lebanon. Therefore, in 1983, Hezbollah, backed by Iran, attacked US and French forces in Lebanon. 241 American Marines were killed in that bombing attack at the US barracks that they shared with the French, and this demonstrated Iran's regional reach through proxies. President Ronald Reagan, at this moment in time, during this attack, declared a cold sort of war against Iran, and further hostilities between these two countries by proxy continued. There has never been openly declared war between Iran and the US, but tensions intensified and the issues continued becoming frosty. To that effect, between 1985 and 1986, another incident happened that almost brought down the presidency of Ronald Reagan. The Reagan administration in 1985 was secretly selling arms to Iran, diverting the money to Nicaragua to help Nicaraguan Contras to fight against a communist government that they wanted to depose. This became famously the Iran-Contra affair. In this regard, during this period, the US supplied arms covertly to Iran. Remember, the United States has a no interaction policy with Iran. They do not interact with Iran. They do not negotiate with terrorists, and they do not do businesses with those countries that they feel they don't have diplomatic presence with. This includes Cuba and even North Korea. But on this occasion, in a secret move controlled and run by the CIA, the Reagan administration supplied weaponry, American equipment to Iran, and the money they got out of this deal, they siphoned it to Nicaragua to help the rebel movement of the Contras to depose the communist government that was there at that time, led by Manuel Noriega. When this issue came into fold during the sunset of President Reagan's administration, there was a problem that almost led to his impeachment, but he survived. Others were held responsible and they took the fall for it, and it was a terrible diplomatic incident. In 1988, the problems were not over. It seems indeed that between the United States and Iran, there were really big issues during the 80s, and it was during the president of Ronald Reagan, and there was always a problem after another. So in 1988, an American frigate, an American warship doing maneuvers in the Mediterranean, mistakenly shot down an Iranian flight 655, killing 290 people on board. On this specific day, during maneuvers in the Mediterranean, a flight from Iran was shot down by the Americans, killing 290. This sparked an incredible diplomatic incident, but up until date, the United States has refused to accept responsibility on this occasion. But this continued to fuel problems between the US and Iran, and the Iranians were convinced that this was deliberate, that the USS Vincennes attacked the flight knowingly and deliberately. The United States has continued to say up until date that they thought that it was a belligerent aircraft. They thought that it was an Iranian MiG fighter that had violated international airspace. However, pundits continue to say that indeed they had not been declared an embargo on. There was no no-fly zone declared during this day or on this day, and it was totally reckless for the United States to shoot at a civilian jet carrying 290 Iranian citizens. In 1989, another event happened between the US and Iran, and this time in Iran, that caused yet again global shocks, global instability, and it sent everybody scampering, trying to find out what is going on, and the Middle East was almost destabilized. In 1989, the Ayatollah Khomeini died. Remember, Ayatollah Khomeini was the leader of the Islamic Revolution that toppled the Shah of Iran, and is the one who had instituted Islamic Sharia law and the Islamic State that is Iran today. Ali Khomeini was the supreme leader of Iran, and he died in 1989. This was one of the largest funerals that had ever been attended by people, with estimates up to 1.2 million people attended the funeral of the cleric Ayatollah Khomeini. The supreme leader that took over was Ali Khamenei. Ali Khamenei, as we all know, was killed late on Saturday, and he became supreme leader. This leadership transition solidified Iran's long-term anti-US stance and reshaped regional policy. The 1990s, therefore, during the presidency of Bill Clinton, were relatively quiet. But it was during this time that the sanctions targeted on Iran and military sectors began to bite. Iranian exports fell 30 to 40%, that is for oil, forcing Tehran to develop alternative networks and resilient strategies. It was during this time that Iran began to form alliances with countries that were traditionally against the United States. This includes China, North Korea, and Russia. Indeed, they found a partner in China, and China became one of the largest consumers and buyers of Iranian oil. Indeed, the connection of Iran and China is what is causing the conflict up until today, and we are going to see that in a short while. Fast forward to 2002. In 2002, the then President of the United States, George W. Bush, declared Iran as part of the axis of evil, and President Bush labeled this axis of evil, causing tensions to escalate. He framed Iran as a nuclear threat in global policy. Keeping in mind that on September 11th, the United States had received a devastating terrorist attack by the Al-Qaeda network that brought down the Twin Tower buildings in the heart of New York. Because of this, the president declared an unprecedented war against terrorism, a global war, and he mentioned an axis of evil. He brought down Iraq, and he forwarded his guns on Iran. He declared Iran an axis of evil and blamed Iran for much of the terrorist activities that were happening in the world at that time. Also, he made it clear and was obligated at that time to protect Israel against Iranian proxies, including Hezbollah and some of the terrorist networks that at that time were bringing problems to Israel. In fact, the Palestinian PLO front, or rather the PLO organization led by Yasser Arafat, which was also getting backing from Iran, was also stifled by this move in the early 2000s, causing and leading to the death of Yasser Arafat through a suspected assassination in the year 2005. In 2006 to 2015, nuclear negotiations began. As you will understand, Iran has always pursued nuclear ambitions. Nuclear ambitions because it feels that it has the need to protect itself, and it has always had an inkling and a want to have nuclear weapons. The nuclear negotiations began because Iran from the 1990s had started using Russian technology to develop nuclear weapons, and the Americans saw this as a threat to peace in the Middle East, a threat to peace in Israel, and Israel was one of the champions and still is a champion of, or rather against Iran having a nuclear weapon. Iran has stated many times and has consistently saying that they are enemies of Israel, and have even at one time denied that the Holocaust ever happened against the Jews during the Second World War. Therefore, the negotiations against Iran having a nuclear weapon began, and the IAEA, the International Atomic Agency, organization by the United Nations, was sent several times to Iran to see and supervise if Iran was making nuclear weapons. weapon. In 2015, when President Barack Obama was president of the United States, he instituted a law, him and other permanent members of the Security Council, including France, the UK, China, to have, and others, indeed, a plan called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, which involved Iran and other nations, US, UK, France, Russia, China, and Germany, to have Iran reduce uranium enrichment, limited centrifuges, and allowed inspections in return in Iran, so that they do not, to find out if they indeed were making a nuclear weapon or whether they had reached to finding a weapon and where their technology had reached. In return, sanctions against Iran ceased, and this provided temporary economic relief. Some of these sanctions that were relieved is that Iran was allowed to export some of their oil to these countries, and they formed a treaty to export oil to China and to Russia. In return, Iran received limited weapons that were not nuclear grade, and for a moment there was peace in the Middle East because Iran had agreed to limit its development of nuclear weapons, and in return sanctions had been reduced, and therefore this helps spur economic development in Iran. In 2018, after President Donald Trump had come into office in 2016, Trump exited the deal. He removed the United States from the deal that Barack Obama had brokered, and sanctions returned. Oil exports collapsed, inflation surged, and protests grew. Tensions escalated sharply, and for the first time, we began to see the citizens of Iran openly opposing the Islamic government of Ali Khamenei. In 2019, a very significant earth-shattering event happened again, and this was the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was the Iran Revolutionary Guard commander. He was killed in Baghdad on a visit, and Iran retaliated with military strikes on Israel, and this again began to cause a fragile balance of power. And for the first time in 2019, we were able to see the extent to which Iran could go to attack Israel and to attack other countries in the region, in the Middle East. In 2025 also, Iran fired back. Knowing very well that Iran controls the Straits of Hormuz, and the Strait of Hormuz is a canal-like passage that is controlled by Iran, where global shipping passes on a daily basis. Up to 20 to 25% of global oil passes through the Straits of Hormuz. And if Iran wants to cut a major tributary of global geopolitics and trade, it just has to place an embargo on the Straits of Hormuz as the world suffers. Indeed, in 2025, Iran disrupted this shipping line multiple times, and raising global energy and strategic concerns, causing prices to escalate of oil in a global fashion. Therefore, domestic instability in conclusion. Last but not least, even as we go on, we have seen, because of continued embargoes and sanctions against Iran, inflation has reached 50%. It reached 50% in 2025, which orchestrated mass protests in Tehran, and the people began to say no to the Islamic, or rather Islamist government. Many of the people in Iran have started to see that they need to go back to normalcy, because the Islamic regime continue to stifle their rights, and they continue to stifle their progress, and because the world hates them because of the Islamist regime, then the people feel that they are isolated and they need to do something about it. Continuous sanctions and strikes on targets that are inside Iran is also causing the people to feel jittery, and they need to depose this government and to remove that government. So fast forward to this year, yesterday, Friday, Thursday, daylight leadership strikes happened. No, before that, in 2025, last year, there was a brief conflict between Iran and Israel, and Israel was able to wipe out a significant number of Iranian leadership, including military commanders, political leaders. A president of Iran came down in an aircraft, in an helicopter in Iran, and that was blamed on Israel. And the decapitation of this government has started step by step. Right now, what we are seeing is also another of that nature. The Trump government has directly attacked daylight, in coalition with the Israeli military, and they have actually decapitated and killed they have killed the Islamist leader Ayatollah Khamenei. It is confirmed that he has been killed in an airstrike Saturday by the United States and Israel. And this latest escalation is testament to the fact that Iran and the United States have begun. It is the beginning of the end of this love that has never been, the hatred between these two countries, and it has begun to intensify, and the war has officially begun, and we're yet to see how long it's going to take. Be that as it may, in conclusion to this podcast today, I've taken you through the 70 years of Iranian conflict between the US and Iran, and the politics behind it and the issues behind it. And we are here to see if this war is going to escalate further, or it's going to end after a few days, and what is going to happen after the murder of the top leadership. Remember also the US and the US and Israel also killed the top leader of Hezbollah, that is Nasrallah, last year. And the decapitation of these leaders, what is it happening? How is it happening? We are yet to see and observe. But my role today here was to explain the 70 years of no love lost between Iran, the US, and a bit of Israel. So the war is currently ongoing. The strikes are coming on, and Iran is retaliating, and we are here to see what's going to happen. At the end of the day, all we pray for is for peace, and to see that hostilities end and peace is restored. This was the Bounce Back podcast by Robert. Today was a special edition. I was explaining about the 70 years of Iran, US issues, and I hope I was clear enough. If you have questions, you can post them. If you have a concern, a comment, you can post it. My number is there. My number is 0700-631-877. We interrupted normal programming to bring you this special edition of Iran, because we feel that just like the rest of the world is on the Iran story, we also needed to give our tale, and we've given a history of 70 years of Iran, US, Israel issues. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. My name is Robert Onyari, and this is the Bounce Back podcast by Robert. Today, Monday. Till next time, peace out.